So I'm actually supposed to be editing my PMP right now, but I realized that this is more important, and so I'm going to talk about Star Wars again for the millionth time. Okay, so recently on Star Wars Rebels, they did an episode called Twin Suns. I am going to spoil this episode, so if you want to see it, click away now. So, backstory on the episode. Back in the Clone Wars, they eventually brought back Darth Maul, and then when Clone Wars got canceled and Rebels got picked up, they continued that storyline, and Darth Maul shows up in Rebels. Now, this is the episode that is the finale to Darth Maul's story. Darth Maul's kind of given up on like trying to take over the galaxy and all that stuff, and he just wants to kill Obi-Wan. He just wants his revenge. So he goes to Tatooine, he's trying to kill Obi-Wan, he meets up with him, and then we get one of the greatest lightsaber battles in any of the recent Star Wars TV shows. And boom, just like that, Darth Maul's fucking dead, and it's great. And I loved this moment because, like, they were teasing this. They had like this moment. They teased this moment in one of the trailers for this season. They were building it up for like half the season almost, and then they just fucking kill him off in like 2 seconds. And Obi-Wan and Darth Maul actually have this kind of like beautiful moment, and it's so elegant because like most of like Clone Wars and Rebels is so fan servicey and so like, oh, let's bring Darth Maul back because he got a double-handed lightsaber and he's super cool, and then he fight, and then there's another yellow Darth Maul and they like team up and they fight Sidious, and Sidious has like 2 lightsabers, and it's like, oh, so cool. Oh, let's bring Ahsoka into Rebels, and then she can fight Darth Vader, and oh yeah, look at all the lightsaber fights, it's gonna be so cool. And then it's like, oh yeah, and how about Darth Maul fights old Obi-Wan in the desert? Oh fuck, that would be so awesome. And then it's over in like 2 seconds. It's like, oh fuck. It's so good because it's like, that's actually what would happen. Darth Maul is fucking old and he's like half robot now. Obi-Wan's also pretty old. That lightsaber fight probably wouldn't last very long. It's actually a kind of a nice send-off to Darth Maul because in like Rebels and Clone Wars, they actually decided to give him a little more character than just like cool-looking guy. So then we get this line.
Tell me, is it the chosen one?
He is.
Alright, so here's the point where I was like, ooh, here's what I think Disney still doesn't understand about Star Wars. Star Wars is not a comic. Star Wars is a movie. Movies have beginning, middle, ends. I've said this before. I touched on this in my Star Wars Canon video. I suggest you watch that as well. And that's why I view Rebels and the Clone Wars and any other expanded universe outside of the main episodic films as what-if expanded universe stories. I don't care what Disney says is canon or what anyone says is canon. Anything but the main films is just other stories in the Star Wars universe. Alright, back up a little bit. So when comics were first coming out, you got your Supermans, you got your Batmans, you got like a few of your major superheroes that are still around today. But eventually comic publishers started going like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if like Superman and Batman hung out and like played baseball? And it's like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if like Spider-Man met the X-Men at one point? And it's like, and everyone was like, yeah, that would be cool. Sign me up. I will buy all the issues where superheroes meet each other. That's amazing. And that's when you get like your Avengers and your Justice League and stuff like that. And that's when comics started going like, oh, okay, so you guys like it when all our characters live in the same universe. Okay, we'll roll with that. And so you get this thing called continuity. Now, continuity is often one of the greatest things and also one of the worst things about comics. Because comics have been around for almost like 100 years now. So how do you start reading comics? Do you start from the ones in the 40s? Do you start now? Comics become more difficult because of continuity. And it becomes especially difficult for the writers. Oh man, how am I supposed to write my Spider-Man story if I have to pay attention to what's also happening in X-Men? Because what if I want Spider-Man to meet the X-Men? Well, then you can only meet the current incarnation of the X-Men. If Wolverine's not on the X-Men team, then he can't show up if Spider-Man crosses over the X-Men, unless you have a story reason for that. The stories become so much more complicated and more difficult to follow. But the stories can also be so much better because every character has this rich history. It's not just like, oh, a character does this and goes through his character arc and that's the end of the story. No, but then we find out what happens then, and the character grows some more. Okay, we know that Spider-Man becomes Spider-Man because his Uncle Ben dies, and he learns that with great power comes great responsibility. But then what happens when he starts dating, and then he starts hanging out with this girl named Gwen and starts dating her? And then what happens when the Green Goblin, his arch nemesis, finds out that he's dating this girl? That when Green Goblin tries to kill Gwen, Spider-Man, without thinking, webs her and causes her neck to be broken. Spider-Man is directly responsible for the death of his girlfriend. Holy shit, that's gonna have major impacts on him. How is that gonna affect this character? And so we see what happens then. And the stories keep going because life doesn't stop at the end of 2.5 hours like a movie does. Life keeps going. And so we get to see things like what happens next. One of the greatest questions in storytelling. What happens next is always more interesting than what's happening now. And so with comics, you get to explore that. With movies, it's different because it's a complete story. It's a beginning, middle, end. It's like life too because there are actual consequences and things have an ending. Everyone dies eventually. There's an end to everyone's story. And that's what one of the things that can make movies so great is you get to see a complete journey. And here's where I think Disney is confused because Star Wars is a complete journey. Luke wants to help out the galaxy. He learns about the Force, fights an evil empire. Eventually he redeems his dad, who turned out to be one of the greatest villains, and they end up saving the galaxy and defeating that ultimate evil together. Now Luke is of course eventually told how did Vader get there, and we get his whole origin in the prequel films. It's not very well told, but Lucas always did intend for Star Wars to be a complete story. Whether that means it's 1 movie, 3 movies, or 6, Lucas always envisioned an end to the saga.
You gotta remember this is 1 movie, and it's meant to be seen 1 through 6. So I think when you watch the actual movie in order, the story will become very clear.
So whether Star Wars is just the story of Luke or the story of Anakin, it still ends when Vader is redeemed and sacrifices himself. And with the prequels, Lucas comes up with the idea of the Chosen One.
Anakin is the Chosen One.
You refer to the prophecy of the one who will bring balance to the Force.
And even when Anakin turns into Darth Vader, he is still the Chosen One. The prophecy is that Anakin will bring balance to the Force and destroy the Sith. He becomes Darth Vader. Darth Vader does become the hero. Darth Vader does destroy the Sith, meaning himself and the Emperor. He does it because he is redeemed by his son. So the prophecy is true. And by doing that, he redeems himself and goes from being Darth Vader back to being Anakin again.
Now, the original trilogy has no hint or mention of any kind of prophecy. So the whole idea of the Chosen One and that Anakin eventually does redeem the Jedi and bring balance to the Force by destroying the Sith and by throwing the Emperor over the thing and sacrificing himself has always been kind of flimsy. And it's like, oh, it's the overarching story. It was always meant to be the prophecy, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I think that's kind of flimsy, but it still does function as a complete story. Lucas luckily did at least sneak his way into like, oh, here's why it maybe doesn't line up exactly.
So the prophecy says.
A prophecy that misread could have been.
So yeah, like maybe they didn't understand the prophecy, and maybe what Anakin felt that bringing balance to the Force meant was eliminating the Jedi. And there's cool ideas in the prequels, but they're not handled well. Now, bringing this back to Rebels, that exchange between Maul and Obi-Wan when Maul says, is he the Chosen One? And Obi-Wan's like, yeah, he is. It seems like they're talking about Luke. Luke is not the Chosen One. There is no indication that Luke is ever a Chosen One. There is no prophecy suggesting that Luke is the Chosen One. There's none of that. That was never a thing. Luke's just a guy who gets wrapped up into this larger story and ends up saving the galaxy. But that doesn't make him the Chosen One. There's no prophecy that says like, oh, the guy, he's gonna be the one that brings balance to the Force and all of that. There's no hint of that at all. But isn't Luke the last hope? Nope.
That boy is our last hope.
No. There there is another.
If Luke failed, then Obi-Wan would have just appeared to Leia and been like, Leia, go to Dagobah, there's training, you need to do some training still. And then Leia would have had to step up. When Rebels does maybe the prophecy was misread and actually Luke is the chosen one. In comics, we call this a retcon. And it's like stuff where, the continuity, it's confusing, how am I supposed to keep track of this decades of storylines in different characters? Let's just reboot it. Let's just change stuff. How about it was actually this other thing? Catwoman's not a prostitute. She just hung out with prostitutes. Spider-Man never got married. He just dated Mary Jane for a really long time. But you can't do that with Star Wars. Because it doesn't fucking work. Star Wars is already a complete story. It's done. It's finished. Now I'm excited that we'll get more Star Wars as much as the next person. But you can't just like fuck around with continuity. It has to all make sense. You can't just like retcon shit. Because there's no status quo in Star Wars. In comics, there's always like things that stay the same. Oh, Spider-Man's a guy named Peter Parker. He's a photographer, and he learns that with great power comes great responsibility, and so he's gonna try to fight crime and stop bad guys so that like the thing that happened to Uncle Ben won't happen to anyone else. And sure, Doc Ock was Spider-Man for a bit, but like he's Peter again now. So and that's just been the same for like pretty much every comic. Is eventually we'll get back to the original version of that character. We'll eventually get back to the status quo, even if the status quo changes for a few years. But there is no status quo in Star Wars because it's more reflective of real life. It's a complete story, and people die and they don't come back, at least not in physical form. Sure, they're ghosts or whatever, but it's not like Episode 8's gonna come out and like Darth Vader's gonna come back and be like, haha, I'm a villain again. Remember me? I'm from Star Wars. Yeah. That's not gonna happen. Because it can't happen and it shouldn't happen. And that's why originally when Darth Maul came back, I was like, that's fucking stupid, he got cut in half, why would he come back? And they're like, but what if he survived? And that's when I go back to all Star Wars things that aren't the main movies are just what if stories, because that's the only way you can have them fit into the continuity of the films. And so, he's the chosen one, isn't he? Yes, Luke is the chosen one. We thought it was Anakin, but it's actually Luke. Nope. Nope, that's wrong. I mean, if you want to think that, that's fine, but you're wrong. Because Luke was never the chosen one. So, yep. I like the expanded universe, but only as like a what if. You can't like say one version of it is more important than the other, and you can't like retcon shit. You have to deal with the continuity that's already there. You can't like if you're gonna like fill in the gaps of every single history of the Jedi and every angle and fill in the gaps between every movie, then you gotta like stick to what we know is true. You can't just like change shit because you don't like it. Oh, the prophecy thing in the prequels was dumb, so let's just say it was about Luke and then it makes sense. No it doesn't, idiots. And that's like I think the biggest thing is like just because you don't like parts of the continuity and some of them are and some parts are dumb, you can't just like change it because that's being just as lazy as anyone else, you know? Like you're doing the same thing that Lucas did, which is what everyone had a problem with. We don't like Greedo shooting first because then Han's character arc doesn't work. Also, it makes no sense why Greedo missed. Can't say Luke is the chosen one because he wasn't. He's not. His story is a different kind of story. It's a coming of age. It's not a destiny. It's specifically not a destiny story because the Emperor just says that Luke's destiny is to turn to the dark side. Obi-Wan and Yoda say that his destiny is to kill Vader, and he chooses neither. So, obviously, it's not a chosen one destiny thing. If it was, then it would be like, your destiny is to kill the dark side, and then he would just do it. But that's not what happened. Anyways, don't fuck around with my Star Wars, because I treat that shit seriously. Okay, let's say go subscribe or something. Check out another Star Wars video, maybe. Whatever you want, because it's free country or something. But that fight was really good. I liked it.